Okay, welcome to a new episode of Bear in Mind's Film Club. We're doing something a little bit different. We have fired up our hot air balloon, and like Phileas Fogg, we are going to take you around the world. But instead of in 80 days, it is going to be in 50 films. We are starting in our home country of England, and we have picked a film called Get Carter.
Yeah, just so if anyone just so that everyone knows, it is an 18 rated film in the UK, which means in the US it would be a very hard R. It may even be an NC-17, or it potentially would have been when it was released. So there is some content in this that is a bit sensitive. So if you're not up for that, probably not the episode for you to watch. And obviously if you choose to watch this film afterwards, again, just be aware there are some very adult themes in the film. It doesn't detract from the film being absolutely incredible, but it is a very, very adult film. So just before we start, why did we choose this film, James?
Well, we had an internal debate on whether we can class the North and the South as separate countries. And
we didn't debate whether it was separate countries.
And we landed on no. So we went for Get Carter because it is about an ex-Northerner who has lived down south for quite some time, coming back up north to investigate the murder of his brother. So we thought, I think that it covered both areas of the.
I think for non-Brits potentially watching this, who don't necessarily understand, there is quite a significant cultural divide between the North and the South in England. The South typically is thought of as having more money, as being a bit posher. That's where the Queen lives. That's the kind of Hugh Grant movie kind of area. And then in the North, it's usually seen as being a bit poorer, a bit more miserable, bad weather all the time, coal mining towns, that sort of thing. So you've for foreign viewers, potentially something like the Full Monty is representative of what the North is thought of as in England. So there was a debate between us as to whether we should split England to a northern film and a southern film. We haven't chosen to do that because I think Get Carter actually does do a nice job of showing England as a whole, even though it's predominantly set in the northeast. And maybe in a future spin-off, we might actually do a regional film show. But for this one, we're going to start with England. Later in the series, we're going to focus on the home countries.
Yeah, so for Wales. This first season, let's say Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and potentially Ireland as well.
The Republic of Ireland, yeah.
Cover the British Isles and then take our balloon elsewhere for later seasons.
Indeed.
This film is set up in your place of birth.
Yeah, my neck of the woods.
Yeah.
My accent is about as authentic as Michael Caine's is. I currently live in Gateshead, which is where most of the film is set. I am quite literally on one side of the Tyne. It takes me 5 minutes to make it to Newcastle over what's called High Level Bridge, which is a double bridge that is featured in the film.
Is that the bridge in question?
There are many of there's a few bridges that are featured in the film. There's Old Red Hugh Bridge, it looks like anyway. That is where the the scrapyard was. It looked like it was Old Red Hugh Bridge. I'll confirm that later on.
Yeah.
Then there's High Level Bridge, which is right next to my house, which is a double layer bridge. So you've got road traffic on the lower layer, and then you've got trains on the top. That was where, in the scene where Michael Caine's character and his sister-in-law, sort of, the dark-haired lady, were arguing on the bridge, and the
southern chaps came.
The southern chaps came in their red car, and he had to escape down some steps and things. So you can, in that shot, actually, you can see where my house is currently.
Yeah.
Although the buildings that I live in don't exist
back then.
at that
You mean
time.
It's not perpetually the 70s up in Newcastle.
I mean, some of it is perpetually the 70s, certainly. Yeah. But
it's weird in the fact that how. You know, when you watch films from the 30s and they feel like a really bygone era. I think we've now hit the point where films set in the 70s also feel like a very bygone.
Well, yeah. I mean,
But, you know, it is the northern 70s, so really it's the 30s.
I mean, this was when, as it shows in the film as well, this was when mining was still the one of the top industries up here. Excuse me. It was before Thatcher closed all the mines and all the ironworks and steelworks and things.
Yeah.
So it would look a bit older in ways than you necessarily expect it to be. I was born in a town called Consett, which is about 15 miles from here, give or take. So about 30-minute drive ish.
Yeah.
And that was one of the home of one of the largest steelworks in the country at the time when this was filmed. When I was born in '82, it had already been closed, I think, and by the time I actually remember anything to do with that area, it had been completely torn down and turned into a large parkland. So. So yeah, I mean, this film was released in what year was it? I've got
71.
71, yeah, March 1971. So by the time I was born, so only like 11 years later, the northeast had drastically changed, and obviously even more so now.
So it's
what I found. Go on.
Say, well, you go first because you might be on track with what you were saying.
What I found interesting with some of the location choices was that there's nothing actually in the centre of Newcastle. Something that when I moved here early in the year, I realised I suppose I'd forgotten, is that Newcastle has an image of being a heavily industrial town. And so you kind of think of it as being an ugly city and this, that and the other. Actually, when you get into Newcastle, it's beautiful. And there's some incredible Victorian buildings in the centre, monuments, all sorts of things. And obviously in this film, they deliberately chose not to go into Newcastle itself, like right into the heart, because... although I expect pollution-wise and etc., it was possibly a bit dirtier than it is now. It still would have looked quite grand, and I think obviously they wanted it to show some of the harshness of the north and show some of the dirtiness of the north, because of it being, I suppose, it was almost an untamed wilderness in its way, and I think. That was reflected in the style of film that it was. It felt very much like a Western to me.
Yeah, also I think there's a lengthy train journey at the start of the film.
Mm.
And I think there is an element of if London is civilized, right?
Mm.
We're going elsewhere. We're going
to the Wild West,
yeah.
or the Wild Northeast in this case.
And
Um,
one thing I thought was very interesting is how voyeuristic the camera work is. They use the camera in such a way that it doesn't feel like you're a passive. Well, passive is the wrong word. It doesn't feel like you're watching a film sometimes as much as it feels like you're slightly round the corner, kind of.
It's almost got a documentary feel to it.
Yeah.
In a way, in that, some of the camera shot choices are restricted deliberately. There are times that the back of people's heads dominate the screen, so that actually you don't necessarily even see the face of the person that they're speaking to.
Yeah.
And I think in obviously it depends on which scene that this happens, depends on the effect of this, but with the scene where he catches up with the guy who orders the hit on his brother, or at least the guy who tells his boys to rough him up a bit anyway. It's in the yard of a small house. I think that's at the back of a betting shop.
Yeah, it is.
It's the bottom floor of an old house,
That's not the chap who ordered the hit. That's the.
That's the guy. Well, it's the guy whose boys it was who did the roughing up, wasn't it?
No, the boys belong to the bearded guy who has the fancy house in the woods.
Yes,
he was.
But he was
the male actor in the.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
he was there as much as he didn't really kill anyone.
Yeah,
but
he was involved.
Anything. Yeah.
Yeah. He had a responsibility.
Yeah, it's like.
But sorry,
I was saying it's like when Michael Caine, Jack Carter stabs him, and it's like, but I didn't do anything. And it's like, I know you didn't. It's that. That's it. Like you didn't do anything to stop it either. Yeah,
the lack of action is as bad as the action itself. But in that scene, we see that shot type where Michael Caine is obviously the dominant character in that scene, and so they emphasise that by when you are looking at the guy who's just about to get killed, you're looking at the back of Michael Caine's head for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And if you do see that man's face, quite often it's obscured, so it might just be this amount of face that you see, which just adds to the effect of how determined Michael Caine is, how powerful Michael Caine is. There is very much a feeling throughout the whole film that Carter is a formidable member of the British mob.
Yeah.
That he isn't. It's not just that he works for the biggest of the London gangsters.
He's a high-end lieutenant for.
And there's a reason he's got there, and the thing is, like for most of the film, he actually isn't terribly violent. There's the threat of violence. But he doesn't need to be violent.
Just his presence is scary enough.
Yeah, as soon as you hear his name, and of course this is in a time where obviously there aren't camera phones or anything like that, so it's not like anyone's necessarily even seen Carter. They've seen a picture of Carter. It's purely his reputation that's speaking when he walks into a room. And so Yeah, there's some beautiful camera choices that are, well, I say beautiful. They're actually quite ugly, but deliberately ugly. But beautiful camera choices that to emphasise Carter's strength. I think the other time that it was noticeable was in the card game sequence.
Yeah.
And I think that's when it was even more voyeuristic, as you said, because Carter almost didn't need to be there, in a way.
He himself is on the outside in that,
but deliberately on the outside.
Yeah.
And again, I suppose it speaks to his power as a character and his legend within that realm, that he's turned up. He's not necessarily broken in, but he's walked into a fort, essentially, of this top northern gangster, although he's still a southerner, but he's based in the north.
Yeah.
And he's so respected that this top northern gangster just says, all right, sit down.
Yeah.
And Carter is even cheeky enough to say to another rival gangster that's in there, I'll leave when you lose all your money. And he knows that the guy whose house it is going to protect him, because he knows he doesn't want that sort of grief on his hands.
Yeah, it's only when he loses for protection of the South that things kind of kick into.
But then that's also sort of at the same point where he
snaps.
He's solved the mystery as well.
Yeah.
He now at that point he now knows what's going on, and so he doesn't necessarily need the protection of the South, because he's now going to go out on his vengeance spree.
Yeah, because one of the subplots is obviously that he is having an affair with his boss's girlfriend.
Yeah, played by Britt Eklund, who, although she's only in one scene in the film, made third billing in the credits, which I suppose showed
she's in two
how
scenes.
big money.
She's in the opening scene as well.
She's in the opening scene, yeah. But I suppose the only real, it was more just the fact that she only really stood out in the second scene. But yeah, she, despite being on camera for 4 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, probably, if that.
Yeah. She's third bill, which I suppose showed how famous she was at the time. I suppose again it was potentially for the international audience to try and get some sales.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, this I was reading up on this, doing my due diligence and some research. This was who was it? It was MGM's last greenlit UK-based film at the time, because they had their own dedicated physical studio in the UK at the time, and they'd decided to pull the plug on that UK studio, and this was the very last film that got funded.
It does come out at a time where British film has kind of started to wane, as in the 60s was a heyday for 50s as well, but primarily the 60s was a heyday for British cinema. You had there's lots of classics that come out in that decade.
Yeah.
British cinema of the
Bond
time
being
is
the biggest,
and this has elements of that taken to an extreme. British cinema was very pot boiling, kitchen sink kind of drama, and
it was kind of two extremes, because you then had you did have your Bonds, and you did have your kind of your Peter Sellers films, and like your Pink Panthers and stuff. So, but I suppose they were such an extreme, and they were like quite campy and what have you. The kind of things that inspired the Austin Powers films, really. There was sort of no middle ground. So as you say, you had your kind of your pot boiling films as the mainstay. But then cinema as a whole actually was going through a bit of a dark period at the time. American cinema was quite negative, and it was focusing on disaster movies and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it was the last one, and it was. It's a film I think was way ahead of its time. Really.
See, for me, it very much feels of its time.
I think obviously the what happens obviously is contemporary to its time because of again things like coal mining, things like the North-South divide, things like
even the way it's shot, all of that feels very much in keeping with cinema at the time. Like, there's parts of it that reminds me of Saturday night, Sunday mornings.
Yeah,
and it feels like a slightly more, for want of a better term, extreme take on that kind of filmmaking. But it does feel very much almost like the end of that era of filmmaking. And then we touch back on themes like this going forward. Like, it's almost in pastiche, like things like Lock, Stock.
Yeah, well, I mean, Guy Ritchie was actually one of the people that was responsible for a retrospective look at Get Carter. Because when Get Carter came out, it didn't win any major awards. So no BAFTAs, no Oscars. Financially, it did all right in the UK, but critically it didn't do well at all. And I could understand why, to be honest, because it was, for the sensibilities of the time, for having such a hard 18.
Yeah.
I mean, the film opens with some still shots in the background that admittedly are slightly out of focus, but some still shots in the background of some graphic hardcore sex, which for the mainstream British audience at the time would have been shocking, absolutely shocking. People potentially would have walked out of the cinema seeing that. But yeah, Guy Ritchie and Quentin Tarantino are referenced as being people who were huge fans of this film. Obviously, Guy Ritchie, I think, he doesn't necessarily do a pastiche of it. He almost, like, his style with Lock, Stock and the likes are almost what do you call it? It's not a pastiche, but a tribute, if anything. And then in the late 90s, when obviously the end of the century and also the end of the millennium was coming to was happening. There was a retrospective look on a century of cinema. All around the world, and in the UK, Get Carter finally got the credit that it deserved. The BFI listed it as the 16th best British film ever made, and Total Film actually put it as the greatest British film ever made. In there.
Oh, here's a fun fact for you:
Go on.
The Stallone starring American remake of 2000 never got a theatrical release in the UK.
Yeah, I think I remember, and I think it was because there was such negativity towards it, because at the time, because obviously it was released quite early in the 2000s, and it was when the Michael Caine version was actually having a bit of a renaissance because of, as we'd said, the turn of the century and the retrospective look at a century of cinema. The Michael Caine version was suddenly on television again, and it was suddenly on like VHS and early DVDs, and
DVD was the first thing it got released on, I think.
Yeah, so it was probably a good move not to release Get Carter, the Stallone version, in the UK.
Yeah.
I remember it did get released in the on home video and DVD. I was working in the DVD shop, I think, by the time it got released. But I did watch it. It was okay. Right.
Yeah.
However, not the only remake of sorts.
Yeah, there was an adaptation of the same book that got turned into an early blaxploitation film.
Yeah, called Hitman. Which I do want to watch at some point if we can find it, because that was the American wing of MGM. So it was United Artists. They decided not to push Get Carter hard in the States.
Yeah.
It was pretty much only on the drive-in cinema circuit, not necessarily in mainstream cinemas. So I think because they'd already got the rights to do an adaptation of that book, they decided to do an American-centric one. And of course, blaxploitation was making money at the time.
In the themes of... they share similar themes. As in the two... Kind of what Get Carter does and the genre of blaxploitation do share similar...
motivations, I suppose. Yeah.
It's... One thing I found interesting with him, like early on in the film, he gets a shotgun.
Yeah.
He never once fires that shotgun. He kills people with it.
But yeah.
He never once fires it, which I find an interesting through line for the film.
Well, I think even then, when guns were legal in the UK. And obviously that was an illegal gun. It was purchased illegally. But even then, when guns were legal in the UK, although in theory that particular gun might actually still be legal now if you've got the correct farmer's license for it.
It's a shotgun.
So you'd need a hunter's or a farmer's license. But I suppose the notion of shooting people was still...
The thing is, he does shoot people. He shoots people with a pistol. He stabs people.
Yeah, when he... I
just find it quite interesting that you get this big gun introduced early on, and it's only ever used to bludgeon people.
But again, I think that goes with Carter's reputation.
Yeah.
In that, he doesn't need to kill people until fairly late in the film, and that gun is there almost to represent Carter.
Yeah.
Of this could obliterate you, but I'm going to use the other end of it.
Yeah.
If I'm going to kill you at all with it, I'm going to cave your skull in with it rather than that. So, and I suppose that speaks to the vengeance as well of the film. That it is about vengeance. It is about revenge. It is about calculated anger. And that's what it is. He's very calculated in everything he does.
There is the through line as well. Obviously, there's the plot involving his niece / maybe daughter.
Yes.
Which is where some of the film's darker plot elements come
Yeah, because it was, as we've aforementioned, the opening shot of the film starts with Carter and his boss and a couple of other criminal folk in London watching some hardcore pornography, because that was something at the time that would have been the one of the things that the mob would have dealt with, as well as drugs, guns, etc.
It is one point where I think they make an attempt to moralise Carter slightly.
Yeah.
In the fact that they show him having a distaste for it in that opening scene.
But then, I mean, that was the general consensus of Britain at the time. I mean, it would have been illegal material at the time. So even for someone like Carter, who is a paid murderer essentially, it's something that even he feels a bit. I don't I'm not keen on. And then, of course, later on in the film, where he watches one of these films and his daughter slash niece is in it. That's his breaking point, because he's realised that his particular job, his particular life choices, as much as he doesn't necessarily like that material, he's still selling that material.
Yeah.
Like he said to the guy in the alleyway that he stabs, when the guy's going, "I didn't do anything." Exactly. That's almost what Carter's feeling there. He didn't do anything. He didn't not sell this.
Yeah.
So,
and it's telling, I think, that his revenge on the Northern boss is the police, not.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
it is. Yeah.
He frames the. Not that he needed much framing, but he does add murder into the equation to frame the.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be the easier thing to prove as such, because obviously, excuse me, at the time, again, showing it at the age of the film, I suppose, forensics wouldn't have been as advanced. So, if you did stage a murder like that, then you could probably call an anonymous tip in, and you could probably, and then being all of the other things that would be in that mansion, the drugs, which would have been incredibly illegal, because there's going to be cocaine and heroin in there. There's going to be pornography. There's going to be huge amounts of cash that he won't be able to explain.
Yeah.
So one way or another, he's going down. And chances are, if he goes to prison, of course, he might end up in a prison with rival gang members.
Yeah.
So he might have a very bad time of things.
And moving on to, I think, to the end almost, no one makes it out of this film alive.
No, I mean, obviously I've not read the book.
No.
The book, to put some context in, and again based on the North, was influenced by a famous murder that happened in 1967 in Newcastle, called the One-Armed Bandit murder. One-Armed Bandit, for those who don't know, is a colloquialism for slot machines, because some of them literally had an arm that you'd pull to play the game. And that was one of the ways, as with one of the gangsters in the film, that gangsters would get their money, and especially launder their money to hide the money through the system.
Yeah.
So they'd excuse me. Two people were convicted of that murder, one of which had an Italian-sounding name. So the headlines on all the papers were that the mafia is moving into Newcastle and this, that, and the other. But that particular person swore that it was actually the craze
chicken
that we're trying to make a move.
Isn't chicken parmesan a famous Newcastle dish?
It's chicken parm for some reason up here is like the dish. It's in every restaurant, every pub, wherever you go, there will be a chicken parm something, even if it's just a sandwich.
Maybe they did move in and
maybe they did.
Not that I'm pretty sure that's not a traditional Italian dish.
No, probably not. But yeah, so this guy claimed that it was the craze. And so I think that in Get Carter, obviously they didn't want to reference the craze directly. All of these people are fictional gangsters.
That said, the gangsters he works for down south are brothers.
Yeah, so not really the craze. So it's it's an interesting snapshot of the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s in the United Kingdom as a whole. So although the majority of the film actually is set in the northeast, I think our aim to find something that represents England as a unit it might be the dark side of England, unfortunately, but I think that actually accurately represents England as a whole. Is it does a very, very good job of it.
It's.
I think before we finish, I think I'll. Sorry, I mean, go on.
We were saying that we think at the very end, Carter is killed by an unseen, well, not an unseen, but you never see his face, and a hitman.
You do see his face. It's when he gets called in bed and he's putting a cigarette out. It's about 5 minutes before Carter chases the guy through the coalfields.
I might have missed that scene.
Over the dirty beach.
I was probably doing the cardinal sin of looking at my phone at the time.
You probably were. One of the mob bosses calls him up and just goes, "You know Carter? Yep, deal with him." And the guy puts out he's having a fag in bed, and puts it out, and then that's it. And then the only other time that you see him is when he takes Carter out, then just walks away.
Let this be a lesson to you, folks. Don't use your phone while watching films.
Exactly. But it was in the UK. We have a something called the BBFC, which is now called the British Board of Film Classification or Certification. Is it?
It's one of the two.
Yeah, but it used to be the British Board of Film Censorship, and at the time, I think it was still censorship.
Would have been.
So, yeah, and even now they have very strict rules on the moral path of a film. So obviously, in more recent times, much harder, stronger, nastier films have come out. Things like a Serbian film, and a Serbian film had to have a special edit for the UK so that there was at least an appearance of a certain level of morality, that this man had a redemption story of sorts at the end. And I think what with Get Carter, because no one is a good person, with possible exception of his daughter stroke niece, that even though Carter is in theory the protagonist in the film, he needs to get his comeuppance in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And I think the easiest way of doing that is having him murdered by a nameless, almost faceless executioner. And it does come out of nowhere, and it does it's a little shocking in a way, but it makes perfect sense because he has to die.
Yeah.
And I think that leads me on to my final comparison really with other genres, in that for me this did feel a little bit like a Western.
Yeah, I get that.
It felt like that man with no name, although obviously he does have a name and he has a reputation, but like he's that guy that comes out from out of town, maybe, and everyone respects and fears him, and it's that waiting for that final showdown type of thing.
Yeah.
And even the music, actually, there were elements of the music that reminded me of that of Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
And of course, the Hauser brothers, who are the boss of, or were the bosses, one of them has left now, of Rockstar, they are British. Yeah. So there is a chance. And they loved gangster films. They loved westerns.
London, right? I think there's a lot of Get Carter and stuff like Grand Theft Auto London and.
Exactly. So I do wonder if actually potentially Get Carter had some Western influences, as in Western movie influences.
Yeah.
And in turn, there's a little bit of Get Carter in Red Dead Redemption, which of course in Red Dead Redemption, spoilers, Arthur Morgan, the negative protagonist,
a
bit like Carter, dies at the end. So he gets a suitable ending for that particular character. And did you see any other parallels with anything, or?
No, I think you kind of hit the. I've said before. I do think it is very much a film of its era. There's parallels within. It's very much. I think there's a few Michael Caine films where Michael Caine almost. A lot of the story almost happens around Michael Caine as much as
what Michael Caine does himself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Caine was heavily involved in the production of this. It wasn't just a Michael Caine acting gig. He was like very interested in making this as gritty and as real as possible. Because although yes, it is a film of its time, it was also a film that was looking forward.
Yeah.
So when I said that maybe it was a film out of its time in a way, it was just because it is such a hard 18, and with how strict the BBFC would have been at the time, a film like that, especially with a star the likes of Michael Caine, to get made, would have been rare, not unheard of, but rare. And I think the fact that it didn't do well critically, although it did fairly well money-wise at the box office, but the fact that it didn't do that well critically was kind of shows that maybe that certain members of the public and especially the establishment weren't necessarily ready for that film.
Yeah.
It does have hallmarks visually of as I say, other Michael Caine films. I think most the thing it looked like the most for me was the Ipcris File.
Yeah, there's a lot of that there. Which is another film well worth watching.
Oh, well worth. Yeah, I mean,
that is the Ipcris File is the anti-Bond before Bourne was the anti-Bond.
Yeah, and in a way, I suppose it has parallels with like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy as well.
Yeah.
Although again, it was before Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, even the TV series. I think the TV series was in the 70s, wasn't it? Yeah. 70s, early 80s.
Don't think we go as far as the 80s.
Well, there was a sequel series because there's a sequel book, I think. So
yeah, but
I think that was the
original. I think was the 70s.
Yeah, and then of course Alfie.
Yeah.
Character-wise, I think aesthetically, Get Carter looks more like Ipcris File, but character-wise, I actually think this is closer to Alfie in a way, which if anyone out there hasn't seen Alfie, it's well worth a watch. It's another Michael Caine playing an absolute bastard in a film, and again quite out of its time in a way, because it had its own theme tune. It had Lulu singing a song, who had done a Bond theme. It had Michael Caine, who you expect to be a hero type character, and actually in Alfie he's a serial misogynist who forces abortions on women he knocks up, and when there was the Jude Law remake in the early noughties, it did a real disservice to the original in that it made Alfie likable, and really Alfie is not a good person. So it was in that time that Michael Caine, I think maybe he realised he's getting a little older, and he thought, I need to stretch my limits a little bit to keep myself relevant and make some important films before I get pigeonholed as someone who's a touch older.
Yeah, well, I hope our viewers have enjoyed this look at English and British, but focusing on English cinema.
Yeah. Obviously, we're going to be covering Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland.
Our balloon
in this
might be taking you to Wales next.
Yeah, and it might be covering a film that we've mentioned in our double feature series.
Or it might not. We don't know yet.
or it might not. Yeah, but we have a short list.
But we will take you to Wales, the land of Welsh rabbit, which I believe is a cinema treat in
cheese
Wales.
on toast.
It's fancy cheese on toast,
yes.
though.
It's fancy cheese on toast because it's got a bit of beer in it.
Yeah, some mustard.
Yeah, beer, mustard, cheese.
Worcester
Make
sauce?
it into a taste. I think there's a bit of Worcester sauce.
Yeah.
It depends on the recipe. Well, maybe look it up. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I can't eat it. I can't eat it. Obviously, I'm allergic to milk.
Hey, you can eat it if you made it with cheese or one of those other vegan cheese alternatives.
Disgusting, mate. Absolutely disgusting. Even the ones that are accurate. I mean, I'm not a fan of cheese anyway.
I love cheese, I've experimented recently with like vegan meat products, and I think they're very interesting. But cheese, I can't do. I need cheese.
No, vegan cheese just ruins everything. Like even supermarkets.
That said,
just knowing it's there makes it worse.
The science going into fake meat, that's getting good.
Very, very good. But we're getting on a massive tangent now.
Yes.
But maybe we'll make some Welsh rarebit to eat while we discuss our Welsh film in the next episode.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, thanks for joining us for our little coffee morning discussion of an English film. This time, Get Carter.
Yeah.
We will see you when our balloon lands in Wales.
See you then.
Like and subscribe.
Yes, do like and subscribe.